Hey Teacher Geeks, so there's no shortage of videos on teaching on YouTube, and I know I'm contributing to that garbage pile, but I want to make a Trav Reacts series where I'm going to give you my thoughts on some of these videos. Some of them will be interesting, some of them I will vehemently disagree with, and we're going to start with this one here I came across. What is the teacher's role in the classroom? Now, I recently ranted about equity, and then of course YouTube pops up everything I've ever not wanted to know about equity. I watched a few of the videos, and on one of the channels, the National Association of Independent Schools, they seemed quite into this equity, but this came up, and I was quite interested in it to hear what this fella had to say. And I think for me, it represents a very fundamental misunderstanding of what good teaching is. So let's have a look.
The big question is...
Straight away, Professor of Educational Technology. So many of our problems, I think, come from people giving us ideas who aren't actually in the classroom. And I feel like this is possibly a consequence of a affluent society where you can pay people just to think and come up with conflicts in their minds that they provide solutions to problems that, we don't really face.
That in an environment where children have access to an unimaginably large volume of information, which is the internet, what should education be?
If you've heard me talk about this before, you know this is a pet peeve of mine, where people say, look, the information's on the internet, why do we need to teach kids stuff? It sounds like a valid argument on the surface, but scratch a little deeper, we'll realize that it's very, very limited. But let's give this fellow the benefit of the doubt.
And if I might qualify it a little bit further, to say, when we had a little gadget in our pockets that could do arithmetic, which was the calculator, it changed arithmetic education.
Now, did we stop teaching mental arithmetic? Did we stop teaching timetables? That's interesting. In my school, I heard one of the administrators say that there was another administrator who wanted to outlaw, sort of ban the idea of using the times, or kids learning the times tables, kids learning how to do, 7 times 7 in their minds. That fascinated me. And I guess you can see, okay, why, but that's so short-sighted. I think and what are the neurological impacts of that? I mean, I've actually just recently read a study where memorization, just rote memorization, can actually delay Alzheimer's in an elderly population, right? And so what do we know about the neurological benefits? We know our brain changes as a result of experience. So if we completely remove something like times tables in our minds, can outsource it to the calculator, what implications is that going to have? Why can't we do both? Teach mental arithmetic as well as teach how to use the calculator.
If that same little box in our pockets now has all of human knowledge, which is the internet, what will it do to education? Children attempt a question in groups of usually 4 or 5. But you should preferably have about 15-20 children, so you have 3 or 4 groups of, because just the group collaboration is not enough. They also need intergroup collaboration, a lot of running around, lots of children milling around computers, that kind of thing.
Lots of children milling around computers. Right. Access to information is not education, but let's see where he's going.
You need a friendly but not necessarily knowledgeable mediator.
A friendly but not necessarily knowledgeable teacher. Right, okay, I'm going to make a video called 10 Rules of Teaching, and the first rule is you have to know what you're teaching and why you're teaching it.
What's the teacher's job? Very important, to create an engaging question.
Agree.
Example, in China recently, I was doing this in a school. The question which I gave to the children was, can trees think? Okay, now the 9-year-old gets turned on by that sort of question. So you need to select the right question for the right age group.
Agree.
And they got to work on it. They figured out a whole lot of stuff about trees. They figured out about things about thinking, about brains, about neural systems.
What did you just say? They figured out?
They figured out about things about thinking, about...
They figured out things about thinking.
Brains.
About
neural systems.
Neuron systems. Right. Now, that is a red flag for me. Now, this is why this whole idea is going to exacerbate the achievement gap. If you are teaching in a district where the achievement gap is not narrowing, but you've got a broader achievement gap, and let's say, for example, between any two groups that have got a disparity in achievement, let's say, for example, socioeconomic status, right? We know that correlates to a lot of factors. Okay. What he's just... I can picture what would happen in this classroom. how did the kids know to ask about the brains and thinking and nervous systems? That's based on their prior knowledge. Now, the computer can only give you the information if you know the question to ask, and you only know the question to ask if you have some prior knowledge. And so what's going to happen if you go to the system where teachers are not imparting knowledge or not providing and selecting and sourcing the content for the students, but you're saying it's all on the computer, go for it and find it out for yourselves, that is going to exacerbate the achievement gap, because the kids that already have the prior knowledge and the literacy levels and like the experiences to know the right questions to ask, well, can they think? Well, thinking happens in the brain, and the brain is connected to the nervous systems. Right, unless the teachers, like, so if he's saying they figured that out, because so not every kid would have thought to ask that question, and so the kids that know to ask those questions, wait, okay, can trees think? Right, okay, thinking happens in the brain. Not every kid might connect the brain to thinking. It'll be, I'm guessing, the really able kids. And so his confirmation bias will be standing in that room going, look at those kids. They're figuring out the right questions to ask, and they're going and searching the information. Yes, but I guarantee you there'll be kids that'll be left behind in that classroom because they don't know to ask those questions. If you don't know, you can't think. Man, do I get fired up about this? I wonder why I get so fired up about this. I get fired up about this, I think, because everyone needs an enemy. I think enmity is really important, and I'm sort of raging against bad ideas in education. But I am raging because I've just spent an hour watching videos about why teachers are quitting, and because I'm going to make another video about this. But it's just they're quitting because there's a increase of too many demands and a lack of support. That's another factor. But these ideas are contributing to the problem. Because if you look at this, what this looks like in the realities of a classroom, you're going to have the able, knowledgeable, experienced kids that have high literacy levels are going to flourish in these systems that he's wanting to create. And the kids that don't have access to prior knowledge are going to flounder.
The works. Would that same question work with 16-year-olds? I'm not so sure. You have to then change to something else. You might change it to say, is it cool to be a vegetarian? Now that's a question that a 16-year-old might decide to tackle on their own, the adolescence, because, it's social.
Okay, now this is who doesn't, in this day and age, right, are we saying that kids don't have access to the internet at home? We must be suggesting that all students have access to the internet outside of school. Ergo, we don't need to teach them stuff because they access the internet by themselves. And at least that the access to internet is increasing. Okay, if they can ask these questions by themselves, then we don't need to be addressing it in schools. Hey. Sorry, interrupted by my wife picking up my baby, who I was definitely keeping an eye on. Where did we get to? Right, okay, so we're saying, look, this idea that schools should just be a place where teachers ask engaging questions and the kids have the internet so they can look it up for themselves. They can look it up for themselves at home, right? My classroom is not where my students come solely to find what inspires them. That's what the world is for. I teach psychology. I very carefully select and create and choose the content that I teach that I know based on my experience will inspire and engage kids. And criminology is a classic example, and some of you might use or have taught my criminology stuff, might use it in class if you're a psychology teacher, and some of you will say it's not good. Many of you have attested that it really engages students, so much so, now let's go. So I think this problem is twofold, saying that the information's on the computer, so we don't need to impart knowledge. Teachers don't have to have the content knowledge to teach properly, right? There's a couple of problems with that. Okay, one, these kids can find it by themselves. That why do they need school? Second, this is going to exacerbate the achievement gap, because the kids that know the questions to ask will do really well, and also the ability to self-direct and self-learn and guide your own learning in a classroom, especially when you've got loads of other distractions, like he's saying, you've got lots of movement, lots of noise going on. You know the kids that really struggle with that? Yeah, the kids from the poorer backgrounds, right, who don't have the cognitive and executive functioning skills in their cognitive capacity to block out distractions. So what's going to happen with this idea? This is going to exacerbate the achievement gap like nothing else.
So the teacher's art becomes not providing answers, because the answers are all up there. The teacher's art becomes to frame the right questions.
All right, I want to meet him in the middle, and I'm going to explain to you my model for teaching. My model for teaching is that I provide the answers, but it's not in a lectured format. So I have to source the content, and this is what I call my building blocks, right? The individual bits of information I source very carefully, right? And then sometimes it might be a website. It could be a website if you like, or like a video online. That's fine, okay? But I very carefully have chosen where that information comes from, and I have these building blocks, and then I present them to the students in some way, plus I have the question or problem for them to solve, so they have to figure out how do these things apply. Okay, so I want to meet him in the middle here. Now, granted, there are times, yeah, sure, that we also have at schools have to be teaching how to access information. That's really important. I wouldn't deny that. But I would say that depends what's the purpose of your teaching. Are you teaching a content-based outcome? I want you to have a conceptual understanding based on your subject, English, math, science, biology, PE. Or are you doing a process-based outcome? I want you to be able to go through a process to figure out and find and filter information to learn for yourself. Well, both of those things have to be important. And so I don't think we can't have one or the other, right? We're just doing a research course, right? No, there are very fundamental skills in English literature that I would want to teach in English, right? How to use language, the purpose of language, how to use language to manipulate and persuade. Not manipulate, that's bad. Freudian slip. How to use language to persuade. In psychology, I want to teach how to cope with stress. They wouldn't know that stuff if it wasn't for me spending hours upon hours upon hours of research into stress and the best things to teach for students that are most relevant, and also carefully selecting the content. Okay, so education's in a bad shape if we're saying that if we're trying to redefine teaching by saying that we don't need teachers because the information's on the internet. If you agree with me, please we need to fight against this. We need to stand up for this. And we also just need logical, coherent arguments, which I'm hoping I'm presenting here about why this is a bad idea. Okay, not every kid has the prior knowledge to know what questions to ask to access and filter the information that they're going to find on the internet. Also, if you've got the internet at home, if they have access to this all the time, so much so that they don't need to ever remember anything, then why do we bother teaching it in schools? Why do they bother coming to school if they can just look it up at home? Okay. John Hattie said it best when he said, we go to school to learn the things we otherwise wouldn't learn. And those things we otherwise wouldn't learn are the things that we as teachers, right, from our curriculum and teachers or parent input or admin input or however we decide, I would love to just have teachers have the full autonomy to say, this is what I want to teach, okay, because I believe this is valuable. And then we go from there, okay. All right, sorry, I've forgotten his name already. What was this fella's name? Okay, yeah, I mean, again, well-meaning, right, Mr. Mitra, but falls down in the practical reality, because I know what you're looking at there. You're looking at the 3 or 4 high-achieving kids who went off and answered that question and learned something off the internet, but I guarantee you there was a bunch of kids that were left behind in that lesson that he just described. And this from the same channel that talks about equity, right? You're going to get massively different outcomes if you follow that path.